Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Neil Carpenter, and I'm excited to be with Health Impact today and introduce an amazing panel of experts on one of the most important, but sometimes least talked about topics, which is cybersecurity in healthcare. So why don't I turn it over to Matt and we go around and introduce ourselves.
Thanks, Neil. I'm Matt Phillips. I'm a director at Guidehouse, which is a large healthcare consulting, consulting company, and I focus in the healthcare and life sciences payer provider area, focus on cybersecurity and risk.
I'm Terry Kaus. I'm the Chief Digital Information Officer at the Guthrie Clinic. I'm a nurse by background, and the Guthrie Clinic is a integrated health system that serves patients in New York and Pennsylvania, and the northern and southern tiers of those two states.
Steven Ramirez, and I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Renown Health out in Reno. So for all you bad skiers, thank you. We, again, are an integrated health system, much like Terry's, that do focus on end-to-end medicine. We also have an insurance subsidiary, trauma facility for the area, and also have an affiliation with University of Reno, Nevada.
Excellent. Thank you, panel. Amazing discussion ahead, I'm sure. Matt, why don't you kick us off talking about the cyber risk environment and your perception of the cyber risk environment, and particularly how you think it will be changing in the coming years?
Well, a little difference between the risk and the threat. I'll talk a little bit about the threat environment. I won't quote a bunch of statistics, but I think what we all know in the healthcare environment today, that one, we're the number 2 industry as far as the number of attacks and the focus of the threat actor, right behind the financial institutions, and we see that continue to grow. I don't think I can give you every statistic in the world to go scare you, but we know that the threat is growing. It's more sophisticated. They'll always spend more money than we can spend to try to attack us, and we can't do anything about that. And the focus of the threat has really changed. It is not just about getting that medical record and going and using it to do medical fraud, or that. It's really about impacting the delivery of care in order to gain, mostly for financial gain. And so that's opened up a much broader area, a much broader group of attackers, not only nation state attackers, but anybody out there looking for financial gain who can go leverage a ransomware kit that's out on the dark web. And so we know that healthcare is the second most attacked industry. We know that the impacts are greater because of ransomware, and we know that that those ransomware techniques are changing quicker than every time we can figure them out. There's a new one changing. So that's the kind of the threat, and if you want to say risk environment, but that's really the threat. The risk side of it is it's a much bigger impact. It's the impact to care. It's the impact to clinical operations that has become the bigger risk side of the equation.
And Matt, just as a quick follow-up on given that we're the second most attacked industry, maybe you can share a couple of names of organizations who've been impacted in the last year or two by this situation that you can share because it's publicly disclosed. I'm sure there's many.
They're out there. You hate to name names. Common Spirit is the one that probably everybody on this call is gonna know from the front page. And you hate to say it, but I mean, they were impacted for a number of weeks across a number of health systems across a number of states in ransomware. And that just goes to show you that, even a large medical organization that has the financial wherewithal is capable of being impacted. And so, that's one. You could probably name off a dozen others, but
that's good.
It's just, we know that it's small medical organizations and people looking for, tens of thousands of dollars in Bitcoin, to those larger organizations where they're looking for millions of dollars of ransomware payments. It's a process.
I know that one of my 4 organizations was a victim. Wasn't talked about, wasn't on the front page, but I was there. We were a victim too. So As a follow-up to that, because this is such a big deal and grown in recent years, and I think there's a growing awareness of it, can you talk about some of the sort of policy and the regulatory changes? I know the SEC is coming out with a big new risk disclosure for public companies. Can you just kind of address that regulatory environment briefly?
I think because we all know what a critical part of the infrastructure healthcare is, we're seeing the government regulators really finally, and I think this is a good thing, they're finally stepping to the table to try to help strengthen every organization in healthcare, especially the provider side. And so I think that's what we're seeing in the regulation is the help without, in most of this regulation, there's not a stick yet. It's really there to help the organizations. When you look at the amended high tech regulation that just came out last year, it talks about here are some best practices for healthcare. The Health and Human Services 405D task force has really helped kind of lay out here's some basic best practices that all healthcare providers should be doing based upon their size. And if you can show that you're doing those things that they outline, then there's opportunities to speed up the investigation, to mitigate the fines and penalties and those type of things, if you can demonstrate those things. And so it's not onerous. It's asking you about, let's look at the biggest threats and do these things that we know all healthcare organizations should be doing. The proposed, if you're a publicly traded company, and the proposed SEC rules is really helping the CIO and the CISO because it's forcing senior leadership to engage, to be able to report on the risk program and the cyber program and the materiality of that program in SEC reporting. And we're still waiting on that to finally come out. The Healthcare Cybersecurity Act, came out and really focused on the 16 critical industries and said healthcare is one of them. And so we want to increase the reporting around healthcare breaches, standardize what's in those reports, get them into the CISA, and be able to go help all organizations, know about the threat quicker and be able to react to it and understand how to react to it. So I see those things all as positives, but they do have an operational impact, not only on healthcare organizations and those that are on the front lines, the CIO, the CISO and their teams, but also senior management and kind of pushing them to engage and to help those teams understand what needs to be done and how do we go about reporting.
Yeah, Matt, that's great. But as we're talking about senior leaders, I would love to bring in Terry and Steve into the conversation and talk about what you think are the perceptions today of this issue, the cyber risk, cyber threat inside organizations, maybe at other providers you're in. Because I know we here are all like drinking the Kool-Aid, but what's your view when you get outside of these nerd panels? What is the perception out there among stakeholders?
Yeah, I think there's various views, but primarily, if you're looking at the provider base, it's like putting a teenager behind a car and telling them not to use their cell phone, right? They think it's not going to happen to me. You don't know what you're talking about or the role that they play in the situation. Now that's not everybody. I am fortunate enough that I report to a CEO that has experienced a cyber attack and felt it in a real time and knows the impact that it has to patients. So it just depends on their experience. I would think that most providers are not aware of the threat that can happen to them directly. I also feel that they kind of think that this is an IT problem. We've gotten really good about downtimes when we're doing system upgrades or responding to incidents that are non cyber related, and they feel that we'll just get it back up, and they don't understand again their role in really continuing the business and the care that the patients deserve depends on their ability to adapt to that outage, and that outage can be several weeks, as noted by Matt with Common Spirit, but then also, other organizations that have been, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks out. And, so I think there's a lot of misconceptions that this is something that is a fluke and that won't happen to them. And it's our responsibility to educate.
Steve, do you have comments on that? Is anything that you have any differences? Is your experience pretty common to that? Pretty similar to Terry's?
I think that's pretty similar. It's all dependent on the users. I think we're seeing, we're just looking at creative ways for our nursing staff, because again, I think every organization is, stretched really thin on nursing shortages, staff shortages that were brought on by COVID. So I think that if the top down, they really get it. You're presenting to the board, they understand the risk, because a lot of those board members have been involved in that. We're starting to see a lot more of these lawsuits, class action lawsuits. There's already been 2 slapped on Common Spirit. So I think that they're really aware of that with cyber insurance and a lot of that, your CMIO, your more technical groups. But again, to Terry's point, it's about just educating that it, takes the whole community. It takes everybody within the organization. Cyber is not just IT's job. And I think that that's that continued education that we do have to have. And our end users are our biggest risk. We still see phishing as the most, effective mechanism, multi-industry that, that's how they're still getting in. So yeah, it's a continual battle to let everybody know that IT's here to operate the system. Security, is a subset of IT, but again, we're here to protect the organization with people, process, and technology. Technology is just one of those pillars. So again, it takes a village to be successful in this.
So just kind of sticking with Terry and Steve for a second, while we have the challenge of sort of like a broad stakeholder environment with very diverse and different sort of priorities on a day-to-day basis, on the one hand, of the stakeholders, on the other side is frankly the most challenging economic environment in some cases for providers that I've ever seen in my career. Other people who are a little older than I am even have said the same. So, I've been there through tough board and budget battles myself, but man, that was a better economic time. So how are you addressing, how do you think organizations are addressing that today? And to be honest with you, what do you think about that?
I think a year ago or 2 years ago, it was an easier conversation because we really didn't feel the true impacts of the workforce shortage and COVID. Now that the CARES Act funding is gone, and we're really no one really thought that the financial burden would continue this long. So I think it's a different story today, but what we do is we analyze the likelihood of impact and what we can do to mitigate that, and then the cost if we don't. So we know how many patient records we have. We know what a downtime is. We know how many visits, and we put a number to that, and we educate that if we don't do X, Y, Z, this is the risk that you're taking, and this is the likelihood that this is going to happen, and this is the impact. And a lot of times it's 5, 6 times what the initial investment would have been if we would have just prevented it to begin with. So that's the approach that we're taking. We update that on a quarterly basis, and we manage it like a program instead of a project, and just course adjust as the environment changes, because we know that that's not steady state.
Steve, I know you're always batting second, seemingly in our question lineup, but do you have any comments on that from your perspective?
No, I mean, Terry hit it on the nail on the head on that. But you have to take a risk-based approach. There's just so many things that can happen, so many things that can go wrong in an organization. And I think it's just you're one hand with many others at the table asking for funding. People need their new MRIs. Supplies have gone through the roof on trying to get that staffing. That we're seeing a majority of our funding go towards travel nurses and, trying to get supplemental staffing in some of those shortage areas. The cost of a Band-Aid has gone through the roof just with supply chain shortage. Everything associated with that. So I think that is another problem. And it even, as a precursor to the question before, that is, again, it's educating our team and then using that risk-based approach to say, this is what's going on in the environment. The headlines, you could always scare people to a point, but that's not necessarily always going to open the wallet per se. But again, we just like to, drive that home and then say that this is the ROI to really show metrics to say this is where we invested in. We know it's expensive to run a cybersecurity program, but this is really the ROI that you guys are getting from that to you know, attacks thwarted, you know, events that could have happened, that, you know, this happened, and really being a storyteller, like this happened at Common Spirit, this happened at Tallahassee Health recently, to really say, and this is why we're investing in these precautions, this is why we're doing these training mechanisms, to really, again, paint that picture that you are spending that money in the right way. It's like car insurance. It's, again, like if you don't have it, you're hoping that person never runs that red light and hits you, but you're going to sure be happy that you have it when it happens. So,
Matt, I think you want to chime in.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we're seeing across the board where there's still an interest in investing in cybersecurity. I mean, healthcare organizations have spent a lot more over the last 5 years, and those board and senior management are still willing to spend, even in an environment where they're trying to figure out how do we survive over the next, you know, 2 to 3 years to get past this hump. They're still willing to go support that CISO on their spend. But what we are seeing is a little more, right? How do we spend more effectively? And tell me, what are we getting on the return? Or what did we get for what we invested in the last 2 or 3 years? With, you know, they're sort of kind of getting to where it's when's enough. And I think that is a continual, as Stephen said, it's a continual conversation back and forth, and really being able to paint that risk picture. And Terry pointed it out. The impact is so much greater these days. If I'm trying to fill a $200 million hole, and I'm looking at revenue cycle, or I'm looking at other things I need to do to go grow my business, and all of a sudden I'm hit with ransomware that's now, you know, on the surface, a, you know, multi-million dollar, if not tens to $100 million problem, depending on your side. And then all the work to go deal with the legal, regulatory, all those other things. It can take everything you were trying to do to shore your business and now flip it upside down. So it's always got to be there, and you got to think about and really be able to measure that risk to make the right decisions and continue the right investment.
Yeah, so actually, Matt, right on that point, can you maybe highlight 2 or 3 things that you've seen recently that you think are the best ROI investments people have been making? And can you talk about just like a little bit more granularity on that return piece? Yeah.
You know, and I'm going to, and this is going to sound like a broken record. But when we come in, and generally, you know, we're coming in on the back end of a strategic advisory for, you know, the healthcare practice itself. And we're coming on the back end or a tag along to go take a look at the program. And every program has third party comes in, they do a one-time assessment, they find a bunch of risk, and they, you know, put 200 risk on a spreadsheet, and now a CISO and a CIO have to react to it. And so they spend a year getting funding, reacting, and next year they get the same thing. And so we come back to almost always, there's 3 to 5 things you could do to lower your overall risk and to be able to focus on the critical things. So it comes back to basic hygiene stuff. Know your assets, right? You know, make sure that you've got a strong ITSM system, so you know your assets, you know your data flows, you know those things on your network. It's do patching and vulnerability management. It's focus on, you know, your identity and access management program, and there's a million ways to follow that. But if you really do those 3 to 5 things and make sure the tools that you have are fully integrated, then you can have the room, both people, process, and technology, to react to the environment or the big next thing, and be able to react to those 5 or 10 critical risks instead of having 100 high risk, right? So focus on those things, focus on integration, and focus on basic IT hygiene and getting rid of operational debt. That's always the answer up front. Now there's nuances, but again, if everybody did those things and they integrated the tooling that they spent money on, you'd see the overall risk posture of the organization lower significantly.
Yeah, I think it's overall just sort of a principle of strategy. If you have a lot of priorities, you have effectively none, right? Terry, were you going to jump in there?
I was just going to also say some of the simple things like, phishing campaigns and things like that can, although it seems such a low hanging fruit, it really is very impactful. And we do it around, open enrollment. So we'll send phishing campaigns around. It looks like open. So not that we're trying to catch everybody, but that they can understand how to identify the difference, because that's typically how, we get compromised, is that somebody lets their guard down. And spending a little bit of money on education and making sure you have a strong framework to show the data around that, I think is really highly valuable.
So let me direct the next question to Steve, which is, we've talked about some great areas of return on investment and some of the tough stakeholder management we have. As a person who's sort of an interface between a lot of different points here, Steve, what could the people who are dreaming of new companies and new technologies and new products, what could they bring you tomorrow, realistically, right? That could make your life easier, that you'd want to champion through the organization?
Well, there's no silver bullet for anything. No technology is ever going to take away human error. I think there's a lot of opportunity in AI that we're already seeing that. I think that's one of the emerging means, that in automation. So SOAR, which is security orchestration automation response. But staffing shortages we see, and with just so much volume and dependency on technology, embracing technology to see where we can better use that. And I think that's the tip of the spear items that we can really focus on. Again, automation, early detection, a lot of what Matt had alluded to. Sticking to the fundamentals and controlling access. As you see on all of this, that phishing is usually the way they get in, and then it's a compromised account. So we can really lock down access, and the buzzword zero trust. Really embrace the fundamentals of what make up zero trust to really control that access, privilege access, multi-factor authentication. That there's still people that aren't doing that, after years of preaching of doing that, and then getting creative and fun with training and awareness. That I put on a spam costume for my board to again remind people about what to look out for spam and phishing. I've had my team go around and put in fisherman outfits. We've used the Home Alone scene of the wet bandits trying to get into Kevin's house, and his defense in depth is a way like we're trying to keep the bad guys out, and that's like the investment.
See, I like the physical. I love the physical extra mile to get attention. I mean, you're just like, there is no way that nothing I won't do to get the job done. I love that dedication, man. Terry, I won't ask you if you've dressed up in costume to try to properly get attention on an issue. But is there any other comments you want to add to that, or things you wish you were brought by people in the community that would help make your life easier that you'd want to champion?
No costumes here for me. However, I would answer that question a little bit differently, in that not necessarily new cyber tools, but as we have vendors who are developing that are trying to solve use cases around workforce shortage or automation in other areas, that they come prepared into the table to be a partner in the fact that they own the risk too, and that this is not just something that is directly on the healthcare providers, that they take the seriousness and the development around those tools and making sure that they can also protect, because a lot of times there are third-party gateways that also impact health systems in a very meaningful way, and we address that through our contracting right at the beginning, and so they don't even get to the door if they don't have the minimum requirements, and we kind of get seen as the bad guy because we're holding up something that either research wants to do or but really we're trying to do what's right for the organization, because in the end we're the ones that are ultimately responsible.
Steve, do you have comments on that? And then I've got to follow.
No, I mean, Terry hit on something that's probably the most important thing. One of the biggest things outside of access and early detection we're getting at is third-party risk management and working with your partners. Because again, you can do everything right organizationally with your training and awareness, your controls, and then the third party. can have your account compromised. So that's something too that we're doing on the MSA. We're adding security addendums, really making sure we're going through and getting a lot more thorough and looking at creative ways on once you give data out, you're protected by a BAA, but is there ways that we can de-identify and get back to the fundamentals of that to better protect our organization at the upfront? And again, making the tough decisions, like Terry said. Do you guys have backup vendors to this? Like, if these organizations aren't willing to utilize proper security hygiene, is that really the risk we want to bring into our organization?
Yeah, and I think it's actually particularly opportune with the number of big in-person events out there and the number of people who are in a very competitive situation around a lot of solutions and the capital environment changing. People are going to be really frantic to sell things to your organizations like fast, like tomorrow, right? And so they will be hyper aggressive with their sales tactics. Maybe if we can just circle back to this for a second, can you maybe just say, here are the two things, whether it's certification or a rule, even at the face of being a little repetitive here, a certification, some rule, some function that every single vendor should have before, in your ideal world, they'd ever open a mouth to somebody who might be a buyer at your provider. Terry, do you want to start on that?
So we have minimum requirements from insurance, liability insurance. And then we have a requirement for the vendor to also have some sort of SOC 2 or something of that nature, where they're also actively monitoring. Those are probably the two highest, and depending on the type of vendor, there could be several others, but that's where we start.
Okay, so that's a filter. If you don't have that, you want people to steer clear, right? Steve?
Strong access management. Again, that's what we see on just open-ended VPN or kind of unorganized structure on how they want to connect. So standardization and strong access controls, and then agree SOC or high trust. If people want to do business with healthcare, again, show us the fundamentals to that, because that's pretty thorough and healthcare focused outside of just the generic nature of SOC. But again, show us. Generally, when we're doing those security reviews, and I'm sure Terry would agree, there's a lot of organizations that still don't have any certification. So that's the ones you're going to have to put through the 500 questionnaire ringer, versus organizations that do have those certifications show that they value security or are investing in security, because we know those are very tedious, and we can have more targeted questionnaires to people that actually have those assessments.
And verifying that what they say is actually correct, because sometimes they say something that's not.
Really? I'm shocked. I'm shocked, Terry. Okay, Matt, you want to chime
Yeah,
in?
I think Terry and Stephen have it absolutely right. But along with that is understanding the scope of what you're asking them for, because a lot of vendors can have certifications and they can be scoped for something you didn't buy. So that's really part of that, making sure that you've got a close relationship with your procurement and legal organization, so you really understand the scope of what you're buying and what they're delivering, and those certifications and processes apply to what you're buying. So that scope is a critical piece to it.
And I just would think that in this vendor environment, there may be a lot of pressure for sales, but it also means you're going to have a lot of choices as provider organizations on who you work with. And you can really effectively use this as a way to weed out people who can't meet your standards, because they need your business a lot more than you need their business, so to speak, with this current environment. So I know we talked about Steve's willingness to dress up. We know we talked about some of the ROI calculations, but can we just also circle back and say, for every panelist, tell me one thing that you think is an effective tactic for communicating this issue to very busy, very stressed stakeholders. And let's start with Steve.
Make it simple and show maturity. So there's a lot of components that make cybersecurity. So boil that down, know your stakeholders, and provide meaningful metrics to show what the risk is, the plan to remediate that, and the progress and stakeholders to drive that to a tolerated level or acceptable level.
Terry?
I would say use real-time examples, make it something that they can relate to. We had a recent event where we had an internet outage in an area that they didn't have phones, and then Epic and all of the services that they use to provide patient care. Although it wasn't cyber, it was a good example to show how the impact of not having these systems can impact the ability to deliver care. And way of actually contributing to knowing their downtime procedures, knowing how to facilitate communication and those kinds of things.
Finally, Matt, do you have some comments?
I think the biggest challenge is staying away from the technical details. I mean, we all like to get into the bits and bytes, but stay away from the technical details. You got to put those risks into business terms, and you have to have metrics that are understandable in business terms. They can't just be in your detailed operational cyber metrics. I think those belong with the IT side. You got to get around IT and say, this isn't just an IT problem, it's a business problem. Let me put it in your terms. And a lot of times that is a process that takes a number of cycles, and it's a partnership with other parts of the business and the CISO and the CIO to really come to understand those terms together and then do it consistently, right? Bring that up consistently. Don't throw something at them new every single time you have that conversation, but show them where you're making improvements based upon the things that outline risk for you that you've agreed upon. So, and that's a learned process, and it's different with every organization. But if that partnership happens, you can get there.
Yeah. And just because it looks like I've got time to squeeze in one more question. We talked about workforce challenges. We talked about financial challenges, and we'll leave this open to anyone who wants to respond. You also have your own workforce. You also are competing for talent. There's a lot. This is an incredibly growing need, not only just this industry, right, but other industries. So maybe can any of you comment about your ability to kind of recruit and retain the talent you need to be successful in your organization, and any tactics or ideas you have around that?
Yeah, for us, I mean, we service a rural community. It's very hard to recruit to, and not to add to the complexity of just these individuals being high in demand. So we recruit and allow for telecommute anywhere besides a couple states that have, kind of labor restrictions around some of their the human resource restrictions. So, I mean, we have opened it up and allowed people to work. I mean, we have people in North Carolina, people in, Denver, some other states that has allowed us to get good talent. And we also look at, individuals that we can, that have the capacity to upscale, somebody who's really interested, that wants to learn, that can continue to grow and get certified, and we can provide that for them.
Steve, do you have a comment about that?
Yeah, a lot of the roadmap that Terry had put together as well, but we also leverage a lot of managed services just to be a stopgap to ensure continuity on that. But we do have we'll send our team to conferences. We'll, ask them what their 3 to 5 year roadmap is, because that shows, their investment in our organization for certifications they want, shows they want to go to additional education. And we're seeing a lot more organizations do that, not only for the shared services, but also the clinical staff as well, to really ensure that retention, because the market is a lot tougher to keep people, and that turnover really cripples organizations, especially in IT security, that, does have those higher touch and system builds. So couldn't agree more with Terry.
Yeah, and then I actually want to bring that question along to Matt too, because Matt at the end of the day is also fighting for talent. There's lots of people even inside Guidehouse who I'm sure I'm trying to steal your people every other day. So, what do you want to comment about how you're attracting and getting the talent you need to succeed?
I think it really is focusing on the critical roles, and as Stephen says, find those partners who can do the mundane things and leverage them. I won't say mundane because they're still very technical.
They're all important.
But who can provide those services that aren't critical for your organization. I think if, you got to focus on those half dozen critical positions, and then, give them room to grow, help them grow, don't ever hold them back. And because you got people always go chase money, and there's a lot of money in the market today, but it really is about creating that work environment for those critical folks. And I think leveraging service organizations who can come in and handle the project stuff. Don't get your people who are critical stuck in a million different projects that have a beginning and an end. Let them be the continuity across all of that, and leverage managed services where you can, that makes sense for your organization. And again, recruit in every conversation you have. You shouldn't have a conversation with anybody if you're not recruiting.
I agree 100%. And I would actually say that holds true whether you're in cybersecurity or anything else nowadays.
Right.
So I want to thank the panel for an awesome educational discussion. I know, in some days in 2019, there was a lot about pandemics we never discussed that we should have. So I think it's so important. This is such an important C-level and board level issue. So thank you very much, everyone. And now time to have a broader discussion with our listeners.